Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
Metro editor Greg Jefferson.
Nancy Prayer-Johnson, deputy editorial board editor.
And in a minute, we're going to talk about what's going on the border, specifically in Eagle Pass, and the Department of Justice really at war with Governor Greg Abbott over his Operation Lone Star policies. But I wanted to start with some breaking news this morning, which is that San Antonio is apparently joining Houston in a lawsuit against Texas over HB 2127, which has been called the Death Star bill. Greg, could you talk a little bit about what's happening? And we've talked about this bill a little bit on the podcast in recent weeks.
Yeah.
But can you?
We saw this coming for a while now. So in the last regular legislative session, the House and Senate passed HB 2127, which basically says, okay, cities, if you're going to pass new regulations in a whole host of areas, agriculture, business and commerce, local government, finance, you've got to get clearance essentially from the legislature before you do so. Before, it was if it's not addressed in state law, just you can kind of do it. It was very kind of informal and
Vague,
super vague.
Yeah.
And cities just kind of operated on this home rule basis for decades and decades. So particularly large cities around the state, San Antonio, Houston, Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, they view this as a direct assault on home rule tradition in Texas, which gives a great deal of authority to cities over the state. And it is that, basically. I mean, they're not wrong about that. Mm-hmm. The argument for the bill, Justin Burrows out of Lubbock, was that businesses that do or companies that do business across the state need regulatory consistency. So they need rules that are the same from city to city to city to keep their administrative costs down. There may be something to that, but so Houston was the first to legally challenge the state over this. They sued, I believe it was earlier this month. My dates are terrible. Was it late last month or earlier?
It sounds right.
Yeah, and now we have San Antonio. At this point, it's the mayor and city attorney Andy Segovia will be talking soon about the lawsuit. It's not clear to me whether they're joining Houston in their lawsuit or whether this is an action the city's taking on its own. Either way, they're going for that law. They want it declared unconstitutional.
And it would go into effect September 1st. So I imagine they're going to try to get an injunction to try to prevent this from.
Yeah. A TRO so they can fight. Just so the status quo is maintained until it gets some kind of resolution in court.
One of the things that has come up as just an example of how problematic this can be for local communities who want to be able to govern themselves is the idea of construction workers getting water breaks. There has been talk on city council about passing an ordinance that would require water breaks for construction workers in the horrible San Antonio heat. And there's been the sense, and again, I think there's the language of the state law is kind of vague, but there's been some concern that city would be prevented from doing something like that.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. I know the Express News had a story recently about someone who died, and I mean, construction workers do die, and I can see why city council members would want to have these policies that'll try to help those construction workers. But there's a lot of different issues that this really ties their hands, and of course it's all political.
Yeah,
they just don't want them to have any power at all.
Right. In the case of water breaks, so there was an ordinance that was kind of getting moving in the city council committee system that would have mandated, I think it was a 15-minute or 10-minute water break every 4 hours for construction workers. In a council committee meeting earlier this month, the four members on hand watered it down, basically, because of HB. They thought that doing anything broadly to affect every private sector construction company would be a violation of HB 2127. At the time, a majority of the council members wanted to pursue this lawsuit, which got filed, it looks like late last week. It seems like it's already in the works. But, maybe they weren't looking for water breaks to be a test case. So they changed kind of the idea for this ordinance to include only city contractors. So if a construction company is doing bond work, for example, bond projects for the city, then the rules will apply to them. City council is going to take up this ordinance likely in August. We'll see if it gets expanded again. Yeah. But that's kind of the state of play right now.
And what's been going on this is really the kind of culmination, the state law, of a battle that's been going on between the state and big cities. Big cities in Texas tend to be more blue, more progressive, and our state government is more conservative and Republican. And so you've had battles over paid sick leave ordinances in Austin and San Antonio, where the state has tried to nullify those. We've had the battles over non-discrimination ordinances. So this is I think this is what's been building for a while, and it culminated with HB 2127. I want to talk a little bit too about updates on the question of a Spurs Arena. Again, we know this is something that's going to be years in the making if this happens, but it's a fascinating issue. And Greg, we talked last week about the story that you co-wrote about the idea that the Spurs were interested in new downtown arena, possibly with a baseball stadium for the Missions. Since then, you've worked on you've reported that the Spurs have had conversations with City Manager Eric Walsh.
Right, and actually we were pursuing that, obviously. For the first story, we just didn't, it was, talk about a cone of silence. Wow. No. Yeah, so we very, very, very strongly suspected that the Spurs had already been meeting with City Manager Eric Walsh. Last week we got confirmation from Walsh that they'd met twice. The message from Eric Walsh though was nothing to see here, or more accurately, no news right now. We have other priorities for downtown, that being improvements at the Alamo Dome, expanding the convention center, and kind of completing Hemisphere Park. Which is not to say that they're not talking about a downtown arena and possibly a downtown stadium district, which would potentially include a new baseball stadium as well for the San Antonio Missions.
One of the things that's really interesting about this is the potential for tension between the city and the county, because the county, the AT&T Center, the existing home for the Spurs, this was the county's baby, and if the city is even beginning to pursue something new, that's not going to...
It's going to be tough.
Yeah.
And County Judge Peter Sakai, I don't think he was aware that the city was talking with the Spurs. I think he was kind of caught off guard. Obviously the county's got to be deeply concerned about losing their anchor tenant at the AT&T Center. So the county owns this thing. If the Spurs leave, it's not the site's not going to implode. It's not going anywhere. It'll have annual costs they've got to meet. They got to keep the doors open, which means they'll have to either look for another anchor tenant, which good luck. Right now they do have, in addition to the Spurs, obviously the San Antonio Livestock Show and Rodeo. That's that is a big tenant at the center, but that's 1 month a year. So they will have to work overtime to line up, kind of one-off sporting events, more concerts, more large meetings, or trade shows, that kind of thing. Which means you've intensified the competition between the AT&T Center and the Alamo Dome. There's also a thought that the city will likely have to partner, if there's going to be public financing involved. And you did a great column on that possibility, saying, this is not something that that voters are going to warm to easily. And I think you're right. Like if it goes to a public vote, it's going to be kind of problematic for the city and the Spurs. They're going to have a lot of resistance to overcome. Billionaire owners,
They're probably going to raise a lot of money,
right.
and they're going to have to work it.
Exactly. However, you've got a limited debt capacity for the city. You've got questionable voter appetite for any kind of tax increase to pay for it. Yeah. The city will probably, if they're going to make a deal with the Spurs that involves public financing, they will probably have to partner with the county in some way and use their venue tax as an offset.
Yeah. I wanted to correct something I said last week. We were talking about what would happen to the AT&T Center if the Spurs moved out, and I think that would be an interesting question. And I used to live in Memphis, and I was thinking about the city of Memphis. They had an arena that was used by the Vancouver Grizzlies when they moved to Memphis, and then it was also used for the University of Memphis basketball team. And when a new arena was built downtown for the Memphis Grizzlies and the University of Memphis, you had the Pyramid, this old arena, not being used for anything. I was trying to remember what happened with it, and I think last week I said it became a Dick's Sporting Goods megastore. It's actually a Bass Pro Shops megastore, and because I have friends there, I go every now and then, and I've actually been inside, and it's a real trip to see. It's like a theme park basically, and you've got restaurants and all kinds of stuff going on there. I don't think it's something that could be replicated anywhere else. I can't see any other.
I mean, it's pyramid shaped for one thing. So
it kind of lent itself to something.
Yeah, it's fun.
But it's people were telling me you got to go because you're just not going to believe. I don't know if it's the biggest Bass Pro Shop in the world, and I don't want to make another mistake by saying that, but it's unbelievably big. So now we're talk about what's happening in Eagle Pass and Operation Lone Star, which has been Governor Greg Abbott's border enforcement policy. It's been ongoing for a while, billions of dollars of state money being spent on it, but it's intensified in recent weeks. We've had a system of floating buoys in the river, separating the Mexican and U.S. sides of the river at Eagle Pass. And razor wire has been installed there. You had a letter which both the Houston Chronicle and Express News reported on, a letter from a DPS trooper named Nicholas Wingate, where he was basically telling his supervisors that he was just seeing all kinds of humanitarian abuses. You had people being pushed back into the river. They were being pushed back. You had kids getting cut up in the razor wire. There was just an awful story of a woman going through a miscarriage, doubled over in pain while she was caught up in the wire. And you had expressions of outrage from Texas Democrats, and I think it's kind of united even people who are maybe not on the same plane ideologically. You've had Joaquin Castro and Henry Cuellar. Henry Cuellar is much more of a border hawk. They've been in agreement that this policy has gone way too far. And Department of Justice, there were calls for the Biden administration to take some action on this, and Department of Justice has informed the state that they're going to sue them over this policy. Nancy, you spent some time last week in Eagle Pass. What were your observations when you were there?
And on that point about suing, what Abbott's answer to that was, "I'll see you in court."
Yes.
Right. And so, yeah, I had to go down to Eagle Pass for myself to see this. I mean, it was disturbing to read about it and to see it on the news, and just with every story I saw. So I went down there last week. I spent 2 days and stayed overnight. So I went to the border. 2 different places. One was the shelter, Mission Border Hope, and I met with a lady there, Valeria Wheeler, who directs it. She leads it, and she's a Mexican immigrant as well. What she told us is, and Jerry Latta, our photojournalist, was there. What she told us is they're having a lot less asylum seekers go through there. So after Title 42 was lifted, they have seen a lot less. But the people that are showing up there that make it are a lot more vulnerable. They have a lot more injury. They're just
Injuries
in
they
a lot
sustained even
worse.
before they got to.
Yes,
the border.
even before they get there. So, they get attacked when they're in Mexico and other countries and stuff because people know what's up. They know that they are vulnerable and they know they have, and they don't have much, but they have everything they own. The little money they have on them, right? And they're trying to survive. And so cartel members and just thugs, they go and they assault them. It was highly disturbing talking to these immigrants and these asylum seekers and getting their stories. They cried quite a bit just sharing their stories about what they've gone through. One lady told her name is Reina Dominguez. She told us that in Mexico she was attacked, and so she fell during the attack and broke her foot and her ankle, and then she couldn't get surgery, right? And so she said that the doctor said, well, the kind of surgery she needed would take 2 surgeons, and that they wanted $1,000. And she said she had no money, and she just begged them, and she said she just couldn't stop crying, and she talked directly to one of the surgeons, and the surgeon agreed to do it. So then they went ahead and had her surgery, and that was about 3 weeks before I met her. Now, those stitches should have come out of her foot about a week before that, right? Because they should only stay about 2 weeks. She had not had them removed. And so we actually were in the tiny office, and it's not a medical clinic office. This is an office, and it's multi-purpose, and it's crowded, and it's not like the most of sanitary places. And so she's in there, and this volunteer nurse, Sister Ursula, who's actually out of Bernie originally, so she's taking out those stitches and trying to remove them. Now, Sister Ursula cannot, God bless her, beautiful, beautiful woman and volunteer, and sometimes she'll get paid a little bit, but not much, and she's in it, like her heart is in it, right? But she was having trouble seeing, first of all, even with her very thick glasses, and she was trying to remove the stitches, and the lighting wasn't great, and then the stitches were embedded, so it took a lot longer than what it should have, and the whole time, this lady, Reina, and she's younger than me, so she's a couple of years younger, but I have to say she looked much older, and she's just been through so much. And then so Sister Ursula was removing the stitches, and it took a very long time, and she was crying and writhing and in pain, and she was just in so much pain that I left them. I watched it for a while, and then I just said, I'm gonna go, because now everybody there was very open. They wanted to share their stories. They wanted us to see it. They want us to be right there. But I just couldn't even stay in the room for all of it. And then so we timed it, and it was about 20 minutes or so that it took. But it was way too long, and those stitches were embedded. So, the issue is that what we kept seeing, and then, we went into the Urbinas. There's a couple, the Urbinas couple, they own all this pecan orchard, almost 400 or more than 400 acres of land. It's beautiful. It has all these trees, these huge pecan trees, right? So they bought this land, and they said it was supposed to be tranquil, and it's called Heavenly Farms, and the river butts up right against it. And so they allowed us on their property, and we were there. And while we were there, we could see everything happening, right? We could see the asylum seekers still just marching across. They have babies, they have kids, and they're trying to get through this. They're walking in the water. And we're watching this, and at one point they look up at us and they wave, and it just broke my heart to see that and to know, that razor wire, this is beyond inhumane. That razor wire is also under the water. And so they're purposely trying to hurt and kill them. And I get that they are trying to deter them. I get that Governor Abbott is trying to deter them from crossing. But they are seeking asylum legally. They have a legal right to seek it.
Well, I think the point is clearly no one's trying to sneak over here.
No.
At Eagle Pass.
Yeah, no.
There are, people can disagree about the legal process.
Right.
The Biden administration, for example, has put in some new policies. One, that people using an app, setting up an appointment time at a port of entry, and so we can get into the protocol to follow.
Right.
But the attempt that's being made is not to try to sneak in, but
No.
to try to come in plain sight and say, I want to
Yes,
apply for asylum.
Nobody was sneaking. You're absolutely right. And the thing is that once they've gone through this, and Sister Ursula said it, and I witnessed it, and the asylum seekers said it, once they get to that point, even when they see the barbed wire there, if they happen to see it, sometimes it's under the water, right? But when they see that barbed wire, it's not deterring them. They're not saying, oh, there's barbed wire, I'm going to turn around and go all the way back.
You've spent weeks and
They've
traveled
already
across
gone-
hundreds of miles. Yeah.
Hundreds of miles, and they've gone through the jungles. They've faced these assaults, right? They've broken their ankle. They've done all these things. Some have been raped. I mean, it's really horrible stuff happening out there, and and they are extremely desperate. So that barbed wire, all it's doing is it's further injuring them, and risking their lives, and it's not deterring them.
One of the things that we saw when the Chronicle and the Express News story broke about this letter from the trooper was we saw some Republicans defending the policy and saying, well, good, you have to make it, we should make it really tough for people, whatever you have to do. And then we saw others saying, this story isn't true. This letter is just, this is just this one guy saying this is not true. We should point out that after that Chronicle Express News story, New York Times did a story on this, and they cited additional sources and said a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really interesting is that the Department of Public Safety is really, they've really been at war in a way with the federal officials there. They've been kind of blocking access from the Border Patrol and really preventing the Border Patrol from following the kind of humanitarian procedure that they would probably be. But I was thinking of that because you're talking about that couple that has the farm, and didn't they agree to have some wire placed on their property?
They actually agreed. Yes, so they had some different agreements. One was with the state. So at first, the very first agreement they had was with the state. They said it was okay to put a fence on their property, and then to go ahead and arrest the asylum seekers, the immigrants, for trespassing. So they did approve that at the beginning. From the beginning, they tell me that they were upset. They did not want razor wire at all. They did not want people injured. They didn't want the liability. They said there's so many people dying on their property that I look at that property and these beautiful trees and the scenery, right? I mean, there is a river and it is quite pretty. It's rustic, but it's really not when you think about all the lives that have ended there. I mean, it's a cemetery, really, if you think about it. And I could just feel that there. And they said they lost count of how many bodies were there because of the heat and because the elements and everything they've gone through. And these people are not healthy, right? I mean, they've gone through these things. It's not like they have the best of health care. A lot of them have disabilities. They have health care issues. I was told, some had HIV and some had other problems, right? And they're coming across. Some already can't walk, and they're being carried across. There are newborn babies, there are pregnant women. So, one thing I found really, really interesting, and, I only have so much space in these stories, right? We have word counts, is when Jerry Latta, our photojournalist, and I, we went out, we're on the Obinas, on their property. There was some Border Patrol there. And so we kind of rolled the window down, drove up, and talked to them, and we told them who we were. Now we never talked to DPS like that, right? But we did talk to Border Patrol because we know, and so Border Patrol was like, we just said, hey, we have the permission of the Obinas to be here, but we initiated that conversation with them, and they said, oh yeah, you're good. This is where the property line ends, and then they said, do not go over that. We strongly advise you, do not go to where DPS is. And we said, yeah, we know. Yeah. And so we didn't, we don't want to become the news over here.
So what we tend to hear from Abbott and his defenders in this is, well, Joe Biden and the federal government, they're not doing their job on immigration, so we have to do their job. But in some ways, they're actually sort of preventing them from doing their job or standing in the way of it.
Right? Yeah, they are kind of undermining what Border Patrol is supposed to be doing.
Right. Yeah. So there was another thing that I did not get to include was that there are some migrants or some immigrants that are trying to get into the shelter, into this Mission Border Hope, and they cannot get in there. They knock and they try to get in, but they cannot receive everybody. And so I was like, really, you're not saying yes to everybody and letting them in? And it's hot. It is really hot. It's over 100 degrees. It feels, I know that it's over 100 here, but it just feels much hotter there. And so they cannot take the people that have not been processed. And so if they are not officially seeking asylum, they cannot go in that shelter. And there are some people not getting through. And what's happening is, and now Yvonne Wheeler, she told me, Valeria Wheeler, who runs the Mission Border Hope, she told me that she doesn't know how many, but that she does know they're out there and that they cannot go in there. So they're knocking, they're trying to get water, they're trying to, get help. And they're out there in the elements. And they make it over, but they're not, so that DPS, the state, is keeping them away from Border Patrol. So they cannot go get processed by Border Patrol so they can get the right status, right? So they can get the court date and so they can get asylum seeker status. So they are definitely being kept from their due process of this whole process of trying to seek asylum. And then so they're out there in limbo. There's a 16-year-old I heard about, and they couldn't help him. And he was having seizures. So it's quite a mess out there, even more than what we realize, and it makes it even hard, even for the shelter, to help some of them.
You alluded to, I think, the fact that the numbers have gone down at the shelter,
Yes.
and what we've seen as far as the federal numbers, because Title 42, which was a health order that was used beginning with Donald Trump in 2019 or 2020 when COVID-19 began, used that as a way of turning away asylum seekers at the border. It continued for part of this first Biden term. And but it came to an end a couple of months ago. There was some thought the numbers would go up since people would think it would be easier. We've actually seen the opposite. It could be because of some new restrictions that the Biden administration has put in. It could be because it's summer and it's really hot. But we've seen like a 30% drop in June compared to the previous month. I think we had a little less than 3,000 border encounters per day in June, which was like less than half of what we had in early 2022 when the numbers were really high.
Yeah.
Joaquin Castro, the San Antonio congressman, said, and he was referring to this when he said on CNN over the weekend, even as border crossings have gone down, Greg Abbott has become more extreme and more cruel in his behavior. And he said that this is not about border security. It's a way for Greg Abbott to feed red meat to a base of people who he thinks agree with him on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I keep coming back to is the idea that we end up falling back on deterrence. And I understand the idea that we have laws. We have to have some kind of control when it comes to the border. And, if we have an incredible number of people coming to the border, the United States can't absorb everyone. I understand. I think we all understand these issues.
And security, yeah.
But when our policy is based purely on deterrence, on the idea that we're just going to make it so horrible for people, and people seeking asylum, not people sneaking across the border or trying to bring drugs across the border, people seeking asylum, that we're just going to make it so horrible that we're going to get the message to people in those countries that they're coming from, don't do this because it's so awful. So in Trump's case, it might have been separating parents from their kids. Let's just make it so horrifying that people aren't going to come. And I think this is part of that same mentality. There are other things that can be done and to some degree have been done over the years. As far you can make the asylum process more efficient and quicker. You can certainly try to make efforts to provide the kind of aid in some of these, Latin American countries that can possibly make life better for some of these people. That's very complicated. We could spend a whole podcast on that, but this is something that you could look at. We this past week we saw Tony Gonzalez, the congressman, try to make the work visa process easier. I think that certainly helps. There are a lot of things you can do, but just to say we're just going to make it so awful and that we're just going to scare people out of coming.
We're in a position where, and this is just my view, we've intentionally, as a state, and because the Abbott is doing this in our name.
That's right.
An intentionally cruel policy. I mean, when you say make it as horrible as possible to create like an ironclad deterrent, that's really what we're talking about. Intentional cruelty. That's what this policy is.
Yeah, and that's, I think, for some people that's what they want. It's kind of the ends justify the means. But I mean, it will be interesting to see if what the reaction is to this going forward, because I want to believe that people, when they're confronted with these images and these stories, people, I think, have the ability to say, yes, we want to have some border security, we want to have some order along the border, but we don't want to see this being done to people.
I mean, that's absolutely. I know the Urbinas couple, they're Republican and they are not fans of Biden, definitely not. But they're also not fans of Abbott right now.
And they don't want that wire.
They're like, this is too much. And so that's why I also think that they're super important in this story, because it's not like they're the far left or Democrats, or they're far from it. They just say this is absolutely out of the question. Like, this should not be happening. Goes too far.
And that's the thing, we're ideology, because we have our views on things, but when we're confronted in our own lives with something, sometimes that can shake up our preconceptions. And I think so. They probably had some ideas about things, but now they're dealing with some things themselves that maybe it's making them rethink some things.
They did send me some videos. I mean, it's their land, right?
Yeah.
So they have been up close. It's not like they stay away. They actually see it. So they actually sent me some videos from where, some kids were getting pulled out of the water, and they were pretty intense, and they are right there watching it, and they're trying, they did lease some land to Border Patrol as well, and Border Patrol put out some tents, and they just said, well, it's just so they could, give them some water and help them get processed. And then they say the word is, they're for open borders. And they said, we're not for open borders. Yeah. We're just not for killing people trying to get across.
Well, by the time you all hear this, it's possible there could be a federal lawsuit against the state over this. And I think there will be some legal action very soon on it. We're going to wrap things up there. Hope everyone's doing well. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week. Take care.